Alright guys, so today I want to talk about the P320 and share some of my thoughts on the internet about what I think about these series of pistols. Now, probably most of you watching this video have come from another in-depth review or have probably seen some of them in the past, so I don't want to waste too much time talking about some of the common things that are already known about this gun. Really my goal is to give probably more of a unique opinion on this piece, some things that I don't really hear other YouTubers really talk about, and sort of talk about the pros and cons about the P320 in general. Now this one is the military M17 variant, so a couple key differences about this particular one. But before we get into what makes the M17 the M17, I just kind of want to give a quick breakdown on what the P320 really is. So the way I like to think about the P320 is that it really is probably the closest thing to the AR-15 of handguns, and the reason for that being is that the legal firearm is the fire control unit. When I talk about P320s, this is sort of like how I like to talk about it. Really just start with this piece here, because this is the gun. When you think about all the different P320s that Sig just advertises on their site, there are a lot. And really the main piece of commonality between them all is just this fire control unit. The idea is that anyone should be able to come in and, for example, make a pistol frame for this gun. For example, like Wilson Combat, they have their Wilson Combat grip, which has become really popular. What's really neat about the way they break this all down is that the frame, you can tell it's really just a piece of polymer. The only metal piece would be the mag release button, and this you can take out too. You could even flip it around, but this is really the frame. I actually swapped mine out here. This is the large frame. The frame that came with it is the old one I have. This is the packaging for the new one, but I put my old one in here. And this is the way it comes. I think this just cost me about $40. So you just order this and you just pop it in. Very simple. All right, so to put this back together, there's a little piece here. That's kind of what it pivots on. So you'll see, it's kind of hard to tell on the camera, but there's a little cutout in the frame. You just want to slide it in there. Once you get it in, you just angle it down. You're gonna have to come in here and pull the trigger a little bit just so it clears the cutout, and then you pop it down. Really the hardest part is just getting this piece back in. But once you get it in there, you are pretty much all set. So I kind of want to talk about a little more about the modularity of this gun. That's sort of why the military got it. So if you want to carry more of a compact gun, you can buy a slide in the frame and keep that on the side, and then when you want to just have a fun day at the range, you can convert it back into your regular full-size duty gun. So that pretty much breaks down what the P320 really is. I want to talk about, rather than going through all the pros and cons about the gun itself, I sort of want to just share my experience in a chronological order with the gun, talk about like why I really decided to buy it, some things I didn't really like about it. I put about 2,000 rounds through this gun, so it's not the most amount of rounds, but I think it's quite a bit to get a pretty good understanding about what this pistol does really well and things I really don't like about it that much. Overall, I mean, I'd say this is a pretty good buy. The angle of the grip is very neutral, so when you go to hold it, there is not a lot of pressure on your wrist. So when you present and aim, it's in a very natural and comfortable position. Now, that's sort of a pro and a con. And when I talk about why I like my Glock, I'm gonna sort of contradict myself a little bit on why I like this frame, but again, I mean, it has its pros and cons. It's great for being a nice, comfortable grip. But later, one issue I found with that is it doesn't really brace your wrist for that recoil control. So when you combine that with, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the high bore axis on this gun, it likes to come up a lot. So, like I said, it's like a pro and con. So when you go to shoot the gun, it feels really great. You can get some really accurate shots off with this gun. That's probably one of my more accurate handguns, just for that reason, because it's very comfortable to hold. However, when it comes to follow-up shots or shooting fast and things like that, you sort of lose a little bit. That's pretty much my thoughts on the grip in a nutshell. In regards to bore axis and the grip, another comment that I have, and this is something that I sort of wonder if Sig will change in the future in terms of how they design this grip, or might even involve changing the fire control unit a little bit, is that if you notice, they have the beaver tail actually very low. So it is a higher bore axis, but I think it's even compounded based on the lower beaver tail. So, for example, I have my FN 45 tactical here, and when you grip this gun, this maybe you can say has a relatively higher bore axis, but the way they have the beaver tail, there's not too much of a gap between really the slide and where your wrist can sit. But with a Sig, it comes up a lot more. So when you put your wrist up here, you still have a lot of room there. I almost feel like I can put my hand way up here, and I'm still nowhere near that slide, and I'm way above the beaver tail. So it seems like they might even be able to kind of just shape the plastic differently so that beaver tail is a little bit higher. And no grip that is currently out for the P320 really, I think, fixes that. So when you shoot this gun, you get a lot of muzzle flip on it. And even when you see on YouTube, you see other experienced shooters shoot this thing, there's just always that extra bit of muzzle flip that I feel like it doesn't really have to be there. So that is one of the main cons with this gun. And I know everyone talks about, a high bore axis, but a high bore axis really isn't that big of a deal. But again, when you combine it with just the way that the grip is shaped, so you have the straight grip angle and the low beaver tail and the high bore axis. And so when you put all those three things together, you get a lot of muzzle flip. And on that topic of muzzle flip, actually, that sort of reminds me of another point I wanted to bring up, is that the weight of this gun is actually surprisingly higher than what you would expect for a 9mm. Now, again, I do have the large frame on here, and Sig, they make their polymer really heavy duty, which I like actually, but again, it costs you a little bit in weight. You can go rent this at a range and compare it with a Glock. It is a little bit heavier. The Glock is super light. This is a Glock 17. Even my FN 45, it really doesn't feel that much heavier than the Sig, which is ironic, given that this is a 15 round 45, and this is 17 rounds. It just seems like heavier than it really needs to be. And it also reminds me too about, on the subject of weight, the P320 in general, unless you get the compact version, these guns are a little more front heavy. And going back to the grip angle I was talking about, when you hold the gun, it almost feels like, and most guns will, naturally do this just because of the way a gun is shaped, but it does feel like it wants to kind of fall forward a little bit. And, there's no mag in here. Having ammo in your gun obviously has a lot more weight to counterbalance that, but when you go for a reload and you end up kind of getting in this position where the pistol's in your workspace, the gun, it just sort of wants to leave the optimal grip position. The optimal grip position is to have your hand as high up as you can in the frame. So when you end up going, manipulating the controls on the gun, dropping the slide, it every time I regrip it, I feel like I have to get my thumb up here, push it back down into my hand, and then continue shooting again. Whereas on a Glock, for example, just because of the way it's shaped, I never really have that issue with the Glock. It stays put in my hand. So it's not a huge deal, but it's just something to think about. It's one of those things that you don't really realize until you're putting a lot of rounds through it. Renting out of the range and shooting it a couple mags isn't really you might not pick up on something like that right away. What else? Another thing I want to talk about is, to some people, this is a big deal. And so this was kind of an issue I was having with this gun at first, is the positioning of the slide release. It is very far back, more so than other handguns. So on a Glock, for example, it's kind of above the mag release. On my FN, I guess in the FN, yeah, it's a little bit further back too. But here, I just feel like it's a lot more further back than most other pistols. So a lot of people have the problem where when you shoot it, it doesn't lock back on the last round. And I can kind of show you what it looks like. And the reason why that happens is because your thumb will naturally, just due to the position where this is, your thumb will naturally want to put just a little bit, and it doesn't take much force, it just puts a little bit of force on this. So if you're shooting thumbs forward like that, on the last round, see, I'm not really putting a lot of pressure on it. I mean, those times will lock back. And especially you have to think about when the gun recoils up, and again, it has a lot of muzzle flip, so it's going to recoil right into your thumb. So it'll feel like you're not putting a lot of pressure on there, that you're just barely touching it, but it'll recoil fast like that. So when the slide's back, it'll be enough force to keep it from locking back. So I had that problem at first, but I just made sure that my thumb was out of the way. So I just kicked my thumb off to the left, and I never have that issue anymore. But it was one thing I sort of had to retrain my grip a little bit, just to kind of fit this gun. Because again, on most pistols, I can put my thumbs forward, and I never really have an issue like touching that slide release. But on this one, that was a thing for me. So that's pretty much everything I have to say about the P320 in general. So again, this specific model is the M17, and a couple things that make this unique. So we talked about the safety right there. The sights are actually quite unique as well. So you'll see most P320s have the set screws here for the optics plate. This one's a little bit different. The screw is actually, from what I understand, I've never took this apart, but from what I understand, the screw goes in from the bottom there, and that's what holds the rear sight in place. And then, if you can see there, that rear sight, it actually kind of covers the end of this optic plate a little bit. So I'm not an expert when it comes to red dot mounting solutions, but I think that does look, I mean, in my opinion, it seems like a pretty rugged way to secure that plate to the slide. So it's an interesting little design choice that they made. A lot of people complain about the wide sight picture, and I mean, in my opinion, it's not so much of a big deal. It does sort of cover up your target a little bit, or at least the periphery of your target, but I've never really had an issue with that. Even when shooting fast or transition different targets, it doesn't really seem to be too much of a problem. But it is just one thing to kind of think about when you buy this gun. In terms of the sights in general, though, they're extremely high quality. So they're steel, they're night sights, and I find them really easy to pick up. I really like the sights. It's actually one of the reasons why I got the gun, despite the complaints people had about the rear sight. I did like the sights a lot in this gun, so that's one of the reasons why I got it. So the external safety was really the main reason why I wanted to go with the M17 over any other P320 model. I just don't like the idea of having nothing in between your trigger finger and the trigger. I mean, theoretically, if anything snags the trigger, the gun goes off, which, again, I just don't like the idea of that. I don't think anyone would. But luckily, there aren't really many reports of P320s going off when they shouldn't be. Of course, there's the infamous drop safe issues, which I'm sure many of you have heard already plenty about. Internally, they fixed drop safe issue, and they've done that in at least a couple ways I know of. There might even be more, but the two ways I know of that they fixed, and I'm gonna put my finger on the trigger so just check again that it's clear. They made the actual mass of the trigger a lot lighter. So if you look at the earlier P320s, they had more of like the P226 profile. It's like a much thicker trigger. And the mass of that with the force of gravity, it would give it enough force to move back and actually get pulled all the way to the rear, you know, just from falling. So they lightened that up to fix that problem. And then also they included what's called a disconnector safety. And it's kind of hard to explain without taking the slide off and everything and showing the pieces in there. But basically what that means is that when the slide moves back a little bit, like right here, the trigger disconnects from the striker. So I mean, there's no way for it to go off. When it's forward, you see that pressure is back. And the reason why that really fixes the drop safe issues because the recoil spring is extremely light. I mean, it's really easy to manipulate the slide without much force. So, you know, that slide is likely to kind of move back a little bit as it falls if this thing were dropped, for example. And so that way, you know, it completely disconnects the trigger and makes it safe. So, you know, it's an interesting engineering solution. In regards to the trigger, though, you know, it's extremely light in terms of pull. There's only a little bit of take up, and the brake is not that heavy at all. I'm not sure exactly how many pounds it is, but it's very light. And yeah, there's not a lot of travel past that wall. So the reset looks like that's really not that much, and a really simple brake. So it is a really good trigger, and because it's such a good trigger, I think you need some kind of external safety on there. One thing I like about safeties in general, I mean, I can make a whole video about safeties, but I think statistically, law enforcement officers are less likely to get, you know, killed by their own gun if they have some kind of safety on there. It's just, it gives you that extra time. If, you know, I mean, this is kind of, I'm talking extremes here, but if anyone were to grab your gun or try to use your gun for, you know, ill intent, that safety right there just kind of slows them down. And I find it funny when I take my friends or family to the range, it just instinctively, I always put this gun on safe when I'm done shooting it. And every time I give it to somebody, I don't tell them to take it off safe because it's so, you know, trained in my muscle memory. And they present and pull the trigger and nothing happens. And they, you know, it's like 1 or 2 seconds before they figure out what's going on. So that's kind of why I like external safeties, especially when it's, you know, as easy to use. It's just like a 1911. So I think they did a really good job on the M17 and M18 with that safety. I guess one more criticism I have about the safety, though, is that I think they could have done some kind of like more visual way of showing whether this gun is hot. Or rather, not hot, but at least just off safe. So for example, you know, on the FN, you have, you know, the red is dead symbol, right? So it's just nice kind of, when I see that red, I know, okay, it's off safe. I got to put it back on safe. This one, though, the difference between safety on and safety off is actually not like very intuitive. I mean, the way I can really tell is that basically, if it's off safe, you can see all the slide. And when it's on safe, there's a little bit of the slide being covered up. So that's like the way to tell, but this would have been cooler if they could thought about some kind of like red dot right there, just to kind of show that's off safe. It would have just made it look a little more touched up. So basically, just to summarize everything that I talked about, the gun, it's a really comfortable gun to shoot, especially if it's just a range gun. It's easy to get accurate shots with and everything. The main issue is just, you know, if this were a duty gun, I wouldn't feel confident getting, you know, that draw and that first shot off accurately and follow-up shots. And partly the draw issue is because I feel less confident getting that consistent grip due to the way the mag is shaped. I mean, sorry, not the mag well, like the way the whole grip is shaped. My fingers kind of, they don't give enough space for my left hand to come in. And then also, you know, the low beaver tail, the high bore axis, and the straight grip angle, the gun just kind of flips around too much on every shot. So speaking of grip, and I probably should have talked about this earlier, but this is another big point, I think, because the grip is the most important part of any gun, in my opinion. The SIG grip is really interesting because it, unlike other guns, so my FN, right? Look at the shape there. It's more of like a block. And you see it's not that big. I'm going to put that down. Same with the Glock. It's kind of like more of a square or blocky shape. And again, it's not that big. Now look at the SIG. It looks like a big grip, right? Especially when you put these all side by side. The SIG almost looks like, I mean, look at my FN. The SIG grip looks bigger, in my opinion. But it's sort of an optical illusion because it's not. And the reason why it's not is because this whole grip is ovaled out. So because it's more ovaled out, the surface area, at least it feels, I mean, I haven't measured it, but I have a little less space for my left hand to come in here than on my Glock. And then on my FN. So that is due to the fact that because these are squared up, squared off, your fingers, they have more space to wrap around. And I got long fingers, so this is kind of a big selling point to me. These guns, again, have slightly smaller grips, and they're more grippable for a guy like me with really long fingers. Just keep that in mind when if you're looking for your first handgun or maybe to expand your collection. Just keep that in mind because you might not realize it at first, but as you're shooting and you're going for those follow-up shots, really the left hand plays a huge role in stabilizing the gun and keeping it keeping the recoil under control. And if your left hand can't come in to assist you, then you might as well just be shooting one-handed. And sometimes I feel like with a SIG, that's really, my left hand isn't really working as hard as it could. For example, the Glock, one thing I like about the Glock 17 is this hump they put in the bottom. So when I come here, my left hand has all of this space right here to do a ton of work. And it makes it super easy to shoot this gun. So, for those reasons, it's a good gun, but it's just not, it's yet to be perfected. So just keep that in mind, go rent this gun at the range, try it out for yourself, see what you think. And it's definitely a solid choice, but maybe for you, there might be better options for you. And then that's pretty much like my final comment I think I have on this SIG. So thanks for watching. Let me know what you thought of the video. If you want other reviews of other firearms I have, let me know. I'd love to talk more about that. Yeah, I mean, this is my first video for this channel, so anything I did that was annoying or driving you crazy, let me know, and I can fix it for the next time. All right, thanks, guys. Have a good one.